It was the sound that ended the peace. A hungry, grinding, industrial roar that had no place among the manicured lawns and bird feeders of Harmony Creek. One moment, I was in a state of nirvana so profound it was almost comical. There I was, Leo Maxwell, 32 years old and gloriously, terrifyingly unemployed, sitting on my back patio. The sun was that perfect late-morning gold. My coffee was that perfect shade of dark brown, and the silence was so complete I could hear the tiny, satisfied sighs of my neighbor's prize-winning petunias. For 2 months, since my engineering firm had streamlined me out of a job, I'd been chasing this exact feeling. I'd burned through my savings to buy this slice of beige-colored, HOA-governed paradise precisely for this brand of weaponized tranquility. I bought the lie, you see, the whole suburban dream package. Cookie-cutter houses that look like they were designed by an algorithm, lawns so green they hurt the eyes, and a rule book thicker than my old thermodynamics textbook. They promised peace. What they delivered was a 300-page document informing me that my garden gnome was in violation of Article 12, Section F, Non-Compliant Seasonal Decorative Statutes. His name is Norman. He's a veteran. My grandfather gave him to me. He has a fishing pole. According to the HOA, his cheerful demeanor was apparently a year-round microaggression against the neighborhood's aesthetic cohesion. The roar intensified, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the soles of my slippers. It wasn't the gentle gurgle of the community pool's filter system. My brain, the overqualified instrument that had designed municipal water systems for a decade, immediately identified it. That was the sound of a high-capacity pump, the kind you use for rapid drainage. I put my mug down, the spell broken. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. There was only one person in Harmony Creek who would deploy industrial hardware before noon on a Friday for anything less than a natural disaster. And for her, a misplaced garden gnome was a natural disaster. I walked across my unnaturally perfect lawn, through the gate, and toward the community pool area. And there she was, Brenda Higgins, in all her glory. She stood like a 5-star general surveying a battlefield, decked out in a crisp white polo shirt, khaki shorts, and a visor that seemed to concentrate the sun's rays into a beam of pure disapproval. Beside her, 2 bewildered-looking men in overalls were feeding a thick, corrugated hose into the deep end of the pool. The water, a placid turquoise just an hour ago, was now a swirling vortex churning around the hose's greedy mouth. The water level had already dropped a foot. Standing next to Brenda, nodding with the mindless enthusiasm of a bobblehead doll, was Chad. Chad was Brenda's vice president, a man whose spine was apparently an optional extra he'd declined at the dealership. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "What in the name of civil engineering is going on here?" She didn't turn, her gaze fixed on the draining water, as if willing it to disappear faster. "Mr. Maxwell, this is official HOA business. Unnecessary draining and cleaning." "Draining?" I walked closer, pointing to the large, official-looking sign bolted to the pump house wall. "It was just serviced last month. More importantly, this isn't just a community pool, Brenda. You and I have been over this. It's the designated Fire Department Auxiliary Training Facility and Emergency Reservoir for this entire sector. We get a massive property tax break for it. The fire department uses it for their water rescue drills. Draining it without a 48-hour notice to the county is a spectacularly bad idea, possibly a federal one." Brenda finally turned to face me. Her eyes were small, hard chips of granite. "As per the Harmony Creek Covenants, Section 14, Subsection B, Paragraph 3, all poolside decorative elements, including but not limited to planters, statuary, and non-native vegetation, must be approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee. Dadidad. She pointed a single, accusatory finger toward the corner of the pool deck, toward my small, terracotta pot. "Your pathetic little tomato plant," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "was not approved." I stared at her, then at the pot, then back at her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "My tomato plant? You're draining a 50,000-gallon emergency water source because of my single potted tomato plant?" Chad puffed out his chest. "It's a very unauthorized tomato plant, Leo. Its foliage was inconsistent with the approved juniper bushes." "The rules are the bedrock of our community's harmony, Mr. Maxwell," Brenda said, turning back to the pool. "Your flagrant, rebellious disregard for them has consequences. The pool will remain empty for sanitation over the weekend. It will be refilled on Monday, pending a full chemical rebalance." As if on cue, one of the workmen walked over to my pot, lifted it, and unceremoniously dumped it, plant, dirt, and shattered terracotta, into a large plastic trash can. The thud was dull, final, and deeply, deeply personal. That plant was the only thing I'd managed to grow successfully since my life had imploded. I watched the last of the water gurgle down the main drain, leaving a damp, hollow concrete shell. My zen was gone. My peace was gone. My tomato plant was gone. All that remained was a cold, pure, and suddenly very, very creative fury. This wasn't about a planet anymore. It was a declaration of war. I stormed back to my house, the screen door slamming shut behind me with a satisfying crack. I paced the length of my home office, a room I'd affectionately dubbed the lair of the defeated, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and disbelief. My mind was a frantic highlight reel of Brenda's reign of terror. It wasn't just a single act of madness. It was the culmination of 1,000 petty tyrannies. This was a woman who operated on a different level of reality. My internal monologue kicked into overdrive, compiling a mental list, a sort of greatest hits of HOA insanity. The Great Lawn Incident, May. The time she personally came to my door, armed with a tape measure and a clipboard, to inform me that several blades of my fescue were hovering at a scandalous 3.25 inches, a full quarter-inch over the mandated 3-inch height limit as stipulated in the greenery guidelines. She left a formal, laminated violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper. The Festival of Lights. Out, December. My official warning for excessive holiday illumination. I had put up a single, elegant string of warm white LED lights around my front window. Brenda, who apparently owned a light meter, cited me for exceeding the neighborhood's lumens per square foot ordinance. Her own house, meanwhile, looked like a Vegas casino had crash-landed on it. But hers were, of course, committee-approved lumens. The dashboard dictatorship, all year. The formal complaint about my unapproved permanent vehicle modification. The modification in question? A simple, suction-cupped phone mount on my dashboard. According to Brenda, it disrupted the visual uniformity of the driveway panorama. And now this. This was her masterpiece, draining a vital piece of emergency infrastructure over a vegetable. It was so disproportionate, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it transcended mere pettiness and became a work of art. Defeated, I finally collapsed into my worn leather office chair. My gaze drifted across the wall, past the framed photo of my smiling parents, and landed on the collection of blueprints I'd framed from my old job. They were monuments to a former life, a time when I managed water for entire cities, not just the condensation in my fridge. One, in particular, stood out. It was a large, beautifully detailed schematic titled Westwood Municipality Water Grid, Sector 4. It was us. It was Harmony Creek. Something flickered in my brain. A switch was thrown. I got up, my movements suddenly precise. I lifted the heavy frame off the wall and laid it carefully across my desk, the glass cool under my fingers. My eyes, trained by years of this work, scanned the intricate web of lines and symbols. There was the thin blue line, the 2-inch main that fed the residential properties. There was the even smaller pipe that branched off to the pool's standard fill spout, the one the city would use to slowly, painstakingly refill the pool on Monday, taking the better part of a day. And then I saw it. My heart gave a little kick. It was a thick, bold, angry-looking red line running like a subterranean artery right behind the subdivision. The label was printed in stark, no-nonsense block letters. MMRT No. 4, Emergency Fire Suppression Trunk Line. I knew what that was. Everyone in my field knew. It was one of the city's main lifelines, a massive, high-pressure pipe connected directly to the enormous municipal reserve tank that sat on the hill overlooking our neighborhood. Its sole purpose was to supply catastrophic amounts of water to fire hydrants during a multi-alarm blaze. It was designed to fight hell itself, and it ran less than 20 feet from the back wall of the pool's pump house. The gears in my head, rusty from 2 months of disuse, began to turn, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. I started doing the math in my head. Flow rates, pounds per square inch, pipe diameters, valve access points. The city, using the standard inlet, would be lucky to push 100 gallons per minute. It would take them 8, maybe 9 hours to fill 50,000 gallons. But the MRT line, that was a 12-inch cast-iron behemoth, pressurized to at least 150 psi. If one were to, hypothetically, of course, find a way to tap into that line. I scrambled for my scientific calculator, my fingers flying across the keys, plugging in variables from the schematic. The number that flashed onto the little screen made me laugh out loud. It was a single, hysterical bark of a laugh. 4 minutes. You could refill the entire pool in 4 minutes. A slow, dangerous, and deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. This was no longer about revenge. This was about glorious, beautiful, malicious compliance. She wanted the pool full? Fine. I'd give her the fullest pool she'd ever seen. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone with heavy-duty tools, a flexible moral compass when it came to bureaucratic bullies, and a love for creative chaos. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found it. Dave, drain guy. His real name was Dave Sullivan, but everyone called him Sully. He'd installed a French drain for me a few months ago, a job he'd done with the artistry of a sculptor. I pressed the call button. Sully's Drains and Digs, you got the man himself. His voice was perpetually cheerful. Sully, it's Leo Maxwell. Leo, hey man, how's that French drain holding up? We moving some water? We are, Sully, we are, I said, pacing again, but this time with purpose. Listen, I have a hypothetical engineering problem I wanted to run by you. It's a water relocation project on a slightly accelerated timeline. I'm listening, he said, the curiosity evident in his voice. I took a deep breath. Hypothetically, how would you feel about helping me illegally tap into a municipal fire suppression line to refill a 50,000-gallon community pool in approximately 4 minutes? The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could hear the faint sound of a power tool whining down in the background. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, low and conspiratorial. Is this about your HOA lady? The one with the visor, Brenda? I was floored. How did you know? Dude, he chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. She tried to fine me $50 for my truck leaking unapproved vehicular fluids on the asphalt when I was at your place. It was condensation from the AC. I had to show her a diagram of the refrigeration cycle on my phone. I've dreamed of a moment like this, Leo. I'm in. What do we need? Sully's workshop was my kind of heaven. It was a glorious, organized mess in a massive garage behind his house, smelling of WD-40, sawdust, and honest work. Heavy machinery parts sat on shelves next to meticulously organized drawers of nuts and bolts. It was the sanctuary of a man who could build or fix anything. My blueprints, the sacred texts of our new religion, were spread out on a massive oil-stained workbench. Sully, a burly, bearded man whose biceps seemed to have their own biceps, was pulling out equipment with the reverence of a priest preparing for a high mass. On the table between us sat a monstrous pipe wrench that looked like it could unscrew the head of a T-Rex, several heavy-duty pipe fittings, and a gleaming hydraulic valve adapter the size of a dinner plate. We were planning our little escapade with the gravity of a SEAL team planning a raid. Okay, so the trunk line is cast iron, 12-inch diameter, Sully said, tapping a thick finger on the red line of the schematic. The main service valve is right where you said, under that square maintenance hatch behind the pump house fence. It'll have a standard pentagonal nut. I've got a key for that. The trick won't be opening it. It'll be closing it, I finished for him, my own excitement building. The static pressure in that line is probably around 150 psi. The moment we crack that valve, it's not going to be a trickle. It's going to be a dragon. Sully grinned, a flash of white in his beard. A beautiful water-breathing dragon. We're going to need a Class 300 flange adapter to handle that pressure, a flexible high-pressure transfer hose. I've got a 20-footer in the truck that we use for pressure testing commercial mains, and a heavy-duty ball valve on our end to give us some semblance of control. We hook our hose to the pool's main drain pipe, open our ball valve first, then we crack the city's valve just enough. It'll be like hooking a fire hose to a water balloon. Precisely, I said, a thrill running through me. This was the most alive I'd felt in months. The entire operation, from the moment we pop that hatch to the moment we seal it back up, has to be under 5 minutes. 4 if we're good. In and out before anyone even knows what happened. 4 minutes to commit a felony and achieve local legendary status, Sully mused, stroking his beard. I like those odds. That night we became the world's least cool spies. Dressed in dark hoodies and jeans, we took up a position at the edge of the woods that bordered the back of the community property. The pool area was bathed in the cold, sterile glow of security lights. Armed with a pair of binoculars and 2 thermoses of lukewarm coffee, we settled in for reconnaissance. Our mission, should we choose to accept it? I whispered, my breath fogging in the cool air, is Operation Restore Pool Arity. Our enemy, a 58-year-old woman armed with a clipboard and a bottomless well of rage. I used to design multi-million-dollar water treatment plants. This feels infinitely more important. Sully chuckled quietly beside me. Hang in there, soldier. We do this for all the little guys with unapproved tomato plants. We watched, we waited. At exactly 10 p.m., like clockwork, Brenda's back porch light flicked on. She emerged, flashlight in hand, and began her final security sweep of the pool area. She walked the perimeter, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, checking the locks on the gates, peering into the shadows. She was meticulous. She was thorough. She was a complete lunatic. After a final, long look at the empty concrete shell of the pool, she locked the main gate with a decisive click and returned to her house. Her lights went out at 10:15 p.m. Okay, she's down for the night, Sully said. Phase 1 complete. But as we watched, I noticed something. The main security light, a big sodium vapor lamp mounted on the corner of the pump house, was slightly misaligned. Its cone of light cast a perfect, sharp-edged shadow right over the area where the schematic showed the maintenance hatch was located. It was a blind spot, a beautiful 4 by 4 foot square of pure, unadulterated darkness. "Sully, look," I breathed, passing him the binoculars. "The hatch cover. It's in total shadow." He focused the lenses. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Well, I'll be. It's a gift from the gods of shoddy electrical installation. We won't even need to disable the light." The plan, which was already audacious, suddenly felt possible. It felt destined. By 10:30 p.m., my garage had been transformed into a mission command center. Sully's behemoth of a work truck was parked in the driveway, its bed filled with equipment that was strategically shrouded by a dark gray tarp. Inside, on a large whiteboard I normally used for job hunting flowcharts, we'd drawn a crude map of the pool area. Arrows indicated our entry point, our target, and our exfiltration route. It looked absurdly professional. Sully clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, his expression a perfect mix of solemnity and mischief. "All right, Maxwell. Deep breaths. We are not criminals," he said, his voice a low, theatrical whisper. "We are proactive community volunteers. We are champions of hydration. We are warriors against unwarranted drainage. Now let's go move some water." I couldn't help but grin. "Godspeed, Sully." "And also with you," he replied, deadpan. We moved under the cover of darkness. Two suburban ninjas armed with wrenches instead of katanas. The neighborhood was asleep, a silent landscape of identical houses dreaming identical dreams of property values and conforming mulch colors. We slipped through the side gate I'd discreetly oiled earlier that afternoon and crept along the fence line, staying deep in the shadows cast by the decorative junipers Brenda held so dear. The pump house loomed ahead. The blind spot was exactly as we'd seen it, a perfect square of blackness beckoning to us. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Adrenaline sang in my veins. Sully got to work immediately. He pulled a pry bar and his pentagonal wrench key from his tool bag. With a soft thump and a low grunt, he popped the heavy iron maintenance hatch cover off its seating. A gust of cool, damp air smelling of earth and metal wafted up from the darkness below. This was it, the point of no return. Minute 1, 10:48 p.m. I was on hose duty. I grabbed the end of the thick, flexible pipe from Sully and fed it down into the darkness. I heard the solid metallic clank as Sully fitted the flange adapter onto the city's valve. He worked with a quiet, efficient confidence that was both reassuring and terrifying. Every sound seemed magnified in the stillness. The scrape of metal, the rustle of our clothes, the frantic pounding of my own heart. Through a gap in the fence, I could see Brenda's house. A light flicked on in an upstairs window. My blood ran cold. She's awake. She heard us. But then the light moved to the bathroom. She was just getting a glass of water. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Minute 2, 10:49 p.m. "Adapter's on! Hose is secure!" Sully hissed from the pit. "Get in position!" I scrambled over the low fence into the pool area, dragging the other end of the hose. It was heavy and unwieldy. I ran to the deep end, my sneakers silent on the painted concrete. I shoved the end of our hose deep into the pool's main drain pipe, the same one that had carried my poor tomato plant's soul to the sewer. I braced my feet, my body tense. "Ready!" I yelled back in a stage whisper. Minute 3, 10:50 p.m. Sully gave me a thumbs up from the shadows. I nodded back. I saw him brace himself and then begin to turn the massive valve nut with the long-handled key. It groaned in protest, a deep metallic screech that echoed in the concrete pit. Instantly, the hose in my hands came alive. It stiffened, swelled, and jerked with a life of its own as 150 psi of raw, untamed water pressure surged into it. It felt like I was trying to hold onto a giant anaconda that had just been tasered. "Go!" I shouted. my voice barely audible over the sudden, deafening roar that erupted from below. Sully gave the valve another quarter turn. The sound was unbelievable. A subterranean jet engine starting up. A torrent of water, a column as thick as a telephone pole, blasted from the hose and slammed into the bottom of the pool. It wasn't filling, it was an explosion of water. The empty concrete bowl began to fill at a rate that defied logic. The water level was rising a foot every 10 seconds, a violent, churning vortex of white water. Minute 4, 10:51 p.m. I was fighting the hose with every ounce of my strength. It bucked and thrashed, threatening to rip itself free and whip around the pool deck like a possessed demon. The water was already halfway up the walls. The roar was deafening. "A little more!" I screamed into the chaos, though I doubted Sully could hear me. The water churned past the 3/4 mark. It was almost full. "Now, shut it off! Shut it off!" In the pit, I saw Sully throw his entire body weight into turning the valve key back. With a final, agonizing groan, the valve seated. The roar subsided as quickly as it had begun, replaced by a ringing in my ears and the sound of my own ragged breathing. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise. We didn't waste a second. Sully scrambled out of the pit. We yanked the now limp hose out of the drain, coiled it with frantic speed, and Sully slammed the heavy hatch cover back into place. We gathered our tools in a mad, silent dash. Before we retreated, we both paused, crouched behind the fence, and peered over the top. The pool was full. Not just full. It was super-filled. The water was brimming right to the lip of the overflow drain, a perfect, placid sheet of silver under the moonlight, disturbed only by the gentle lapping of its own impossible fullness. Total time elapsed, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. I looked at Sully. My face split by a wide, incredulous grin. He looked back at me, his eyes shining in the dark. "We didn't just refill it," I whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "We resurrected it." I was back on my patio the next morning, in the exact same chair, holding the exact same mug of coffee. I was feigning a level of zen that would make a Buddhist monk jealous, but underneath my nerves were live wires. I was waiting. I knew it was coming. The anticipation was a delicious, agonizing torture. At precisely 8:05 a.m., it happened. A shriek ripped through the suburban tranquility. It wasn't a normal scream of surprise or fear. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated, physics-defying rage. It was the cry of a dictator who wakes up to find her subjects have not only disobeyed her, but have also somehow bent the laws of space-time just to spite her. It was the sound of a world view crumbling. It was Brenda. And it was music. I gave it a minute, letting the sound hang in the air like a piece of modern art, before I casually strolled back over to the pool area. A small crowd of my neighbors was already gathering, drawn by the commotion. They stood in their bathrobes and pajamas, blinking in the morning sun, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning amusement. Brenda was stomping around the pool deck, her face a shade of purple I'd previously only seen on eggplants. Chad was standing beside her, opening and closing his mouth like a goldfish, his brain clearly having suffered a catastrophic failure to compute. When Brenda saw me approaching, a look of faux concern plastered on my face. She zeroed in on me. "You!" she screeched, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger. "This was you! How did you do this?" I widened my eyes in mock astonishment, looking past her at the gleaming, perfectly full pool. "Do what, Brenda? Wow, the pool's full!" "That's fantastic news. Those workers you hired must have been incredibly efficient. You should really give them a bonus." Chad sputtered. It's impossible. It was an empty concrete hole last night. I saw it. We all saw it." I stroked my chin thoughtfully. "Well, that is strange. Maybe it rained? You know, a very, very localized and intensely focused rainstorm? Just in this specific, pool-shaped area? Or I don't know. Have you considered divine intervention, Brenda? A municipal water miracle? It is the weekend. My deadpan delivery seemed to push her over an edge she was already dangling from. I'm calling the police, she snarled, fumbling for her phone. We'll see who's laughing when you're arrested for trespassing and vandalism. 15 minutes later, a Harmony Creek police cruiser pulled up. Out stepped 2 officers. The first was Officer Miller, a man in his late 50s with a magnificent mustache and the weary, 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen every type of suburban squabble imaginable and was deeply, profoundly unimpressed by all of them. The second was Officer Johnson, younger, sharper, with a glint in his eye that told me he was trying very hard to maintain a professional demeanor. Brenda, nearly vibrating with rage, launched into a hysterical explanation. It was empty! He lives right there! She pointed at my house. He threatened me yesterday, and now the pool is full. He did it! Officer Miller listened patiently, his expression unchanging. He then turned his tired gaze to the pool, then to me. So let me get this straight, ma'am, he said, his voice a gravelly monotone. You're reporting that your community pool is full of water? It was empty yesterday, Brenda insisted. I had it drained. She jabbed her finger at me again. I did this. Miller turned to me. Sir, did you fill this pool? I put my hands up in a gesture of pure innocence. Officer, with all due respect, I was at home all night. My alibi is a DiGiorno frozen pizza and 3 episodes of a very compelling show about competitive glass blowing. It was riveting stuff. I can't be held responsible for the spontaneous appearance of 50,000 gallons of water. I'm an engineer, not a wizard. Behind Miller, Officer Johnson coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. He had been walking the perimeter. No signs of forced entry at the pump house, Sarge, he called out. Gates are locked. Valves look untouched from here. The standard fill spout is bone dry. It's just full. Officer Miller sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous 911 call he'd ever answered. He fixed Brenda with a look of infinite patience. Ma'am, I'm not sure what crime has been committed here. The pool is supposed to be full. It's a designated emergency reservoir, is it not? As far as the Harmony Creek Police Department is concerned, the problem has solved itself. Have a nice day. He tipped his hat, and he and Johnson got back in their cruiser and drove away. Brenda was left sputtering on the pool deck, utterly defeated. Her ultimate weapon, calling the authorities, had been rendered useless. The other neighbors were whispering amongst themselves, many of them no longer bothering to hide their smiles. I caught Sarah Jenkins' eye, the ER nurse who lived next door. She was shaking her head slowly, a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief on her face, but the corner of her mouth was twitching upwards. I gave her the most subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The war was over. I had won. Or so I thought. The story didn't just spread, it went viral, at least on the hyper-local scale of Harmony Creek. It became known as the mystery of the miraculous pool, or, my personal favorite, the ghost pool of Harmony Creek. My little act of defiance had morphed into a suburban folktale overnight. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my laptop, lurking in the neighborhood Facebook group. Cheryl P., active mom. OMG, has anyone seen the pool this morning? Brenda is having a meltdown. It's completely full. How? Bob K., grill master. My guess? The fire department did a secret overnight drill, filled it from a pumper truck. Probably wanted to teach Brenda a lesson about draining their reservoir. LOL. Susan G. Loves cats and gardening. I heard from my cousin who knows a guy in the city water department that sometimes underground springs can shift and just erupt. It's a geological phenomenon. The theories grew more and more outlandish. My personal favorite was from old Mr. Henderson, who suggested it was aliens with a hydration ray. Brenda's authority, built on a foundation of iron-fisted rules and intimidation, was crumbling into dust. She had no proof, no witnesses, and her frantic accusations just made her look unhinged. She was no longer a feared tyrant. She was the crazy lady who yelled at water. Every time she insisted it was me, a dozen neighbors would counter with their own bizarre theory, each one chipping away at her credibility. I was basking in the glow of my anonymous victory, enjoying a celebratory beer on my patio Monday afternoon, when my phone buzzed. It was a video call from Sully. I answered, a triumphant grin on my face. "To us," I said, raising my bottle to the camera. "The greatest water relocation specialists in the Tri-County area." Sully was in his truck, but he wasn't smiling. He looked worried. "Don't pop the champagne just yet, my friend," he said, his voice serious. "We celebrated a little too early. We have one tiny little, potentially life-ruining loose end." My grin faltered. "What are you talking about? It was a perfect operation. The cops cleared us. Brenda is a social pariah. We won." "We won the battle, Leo," he said grimly. "But we might have started a war with a much bigger army. Think about it. The city water department." The cold knot of dread I'd felt on Friday morning returned with a vengeance. "What about them?" "They have sensors," Sully explained, his words hitting me like little ice pellets. "SCADA systems. They monitor every main line in the grid in real time. Pressure, flow rates, volume. Sooner or later, probably sooner, some poor guy in a sad little cubicle downtown is going to be reviewing the weekend logs. And he's going to see a graph from Friday night that shows a catastrophic 4-minute pressure drop and an unaccounted-for draw of approximately 50,000 gallons from Municipal Reserve Tank Number 4. He let that sink in. "They're not going to think it was a miracle, Leo. They're going to think a main line burst. They're going to come looking for a leak. A big 50,000-gallon leak. And when they can't find a sinkhole or a flooded field, they're going to start looking at the access points. And the main access point for that trunk line—" My face fell. I finished the sentence for him, my voice barely a whisper. "It's right behind our pool." The local legend of the ghost pool was fun. A federal investigation into tampering with municipal infrastructure was significantly less so. My triumphant victory suddenly felt very, very fragile. Brenda, in a last-ditch effort to reclaim her shattered authority, called an emergency HOA meeting that Wednesday evening. The email subject line read, "Urgent, community security briefing and investigation into pool sabotage." She was going down, but she was determined to take me with her. The community clubhouse, a sterile room that usually hosted sad potlucks and contentious budget meetings, was packed. I'd never seen it so full. People were standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. I took a seat in the back, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, her face set like concrete. Chad was beside her, looking nervous, constantly adjusting his tie. She tapped the microphone, a high-pitched squeal echoing through the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice tight and strained. "As you know, our community was the target of a malicious and dangerous act of vandalism this past weekend." She was about to launch into her tirade, but something unexpected happened. A hand went up in the front row. It was Mr. Henderson, a quiet, elderly widower, whom Brenda had once fined $75 because the birds attracted to his bird bath were unapproved wildlife, and their droppings were a biohazard. He slowly got to his feet. He wasn't a large man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room. "Brenda," he said, his voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner. I think we've had enough." A hush fell over the crowd. Brenda looked stunned. "For 5 years," Mr. Henderson continued, "you've terrorized this neighborhood with your rule book. You didn't just enforce the rules, you weaponized them. You fined me because the sparrows in my yard brought me a little joy. You made the Gable family next to me repaint their front door 3 times because you couldn't decide which shade of beige was harmonious enough. This thing with the pool, it wasn't about a tomato plant. It was about you. It's always been about you, and we're tired of it." It was like a dam had broken. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. People started shouting out their own grievances. The fine for a basketball hoop being left out for an hour. The warning for having a political sign in the yard 2 days after the election. The complaint about the smell of ethnic cooking. Then, Sarah Jenkins, my ER nurse neighbor, stood up. In her hand, she held a clipboard. "I have a petition here, Brenda," she announced, her voice strong and steady. "It's signed by over 70% of the homeowners in Harmony Creek. We are officially calling for a vote of no confidence in you as HOA president, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Brenda stared at the crowd, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. Her empire was dissolving before her very eyes. And then, the final, pathetic betrayal. Chad, her loyal sycophant, saw the way the wind was blowing. He scurried over to Sarah, took the clipboard from her hand as if it were his idea, and turned to Brenda. "Well, Brenda," he said with an air of faux gravity, "it does seem the community has spoken. As vice president, I must heed their call." That was the final blow. Without another word, Brenda Higgins turned, pushed her way through the parting crowd, and stormed out of the clubhouse. It wasn't a blaze of glory. It was a sad, sputtering flame winking out. I was still processing the public coup when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sully. "They're here. White truck, city logo. At the end of your street." My blood turned to ice. I slipped out of the meeting and power-walked home, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sure enough, parked on the curb was a pristine white utility truck with the official seal of the Westwood Water Department on its door. 2 people, a man and a woman in serious-looking navy blue uniforms, were walking up my driveway, carrying clipboards and what looked like a sonic detector. This was it, the real reckoning. "Mr. Maxwell?" the woman asked as I reached my front door. "That's me," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "We're from the city water department," the man said. "We're investigating a major pressure anomaly and water loss event from Friday night that we've traced to the MRT line originating near this address. We need to check the municipal access points on the property line." "Of course," I said, my mind racing, searching for a plausible lie. "Be my guest." I was about to lead them around the back of the house, to the pump house, to the scene of the crime, when a loud, familiar diesel engine roared to life down the street. Sully's work truck, all chrome and glorious grime, came rumbling up and pulled into my driveway at an angle, conveniently blocking the path to the backyard. Sully hopped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Leo, hey," he boomed, as if this was a planned visit. "Just came to check on that French drain, make sure it's handling the sprinkler runoff." "Oh, hey, fellas," he said, turning to the utility workers with a friendly, disarming smile. "City water? Don't tell me you guys are looking for that pressure drop on the MRT4 line from Friday night?" The utility woman looked surprised. "You know about that?" Sully leaned against his truck, the picture of casual expertise. "Yeah, we were doing some late-night hydrojetting on a clogged sewer main for a commercial client over on Mill Road. High-pressure stuff. Sometimes when you purge the system, the pressure surge can bounce back up the grid and make your SCADA sensors go nuts. It's a known phantom signal issue with those old Honeywell meters you guys still use in this sector. Creates a ghost signal that looks just like a massive leak. You should check the maintenance logs for Sector 4 before you go digging." I bet you'll see it happens all the time." He delivered the stream of confident, technical-sounding jargon, a complete and utter fabrication, with such authority that the two workers just blinked at him. They looked at each other, then back at Sully. "A phantom signal," the man repeated. "Happens all the time," Sully confirmed with a sage nod. "Saves you a lot of digging. Well, have a good one." The two workers conferred for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks for the tip," the woman said. "We'll check the logs back at the office before we proceed." They got back in their truck and drove away. Sully waited until they were around the corner before he turned to me. He pushed himself off his truck and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. The last thread was cut. We were home free. A week later, I found myself back in the clubhouse. Brenda was gone. Rumor had it she'd put her house on the market, and Chad's attempt to seize power had been laughed out of the room. Now, an interim HOA board was being formed, and everyone for some reason was looking at me. "Leo, you have to do it," Sarah Jenkins said, approaching me with a clipboard that was starting to give me PTSD. "You're the only one who can lead us out of the dark ages." I laughed, a nervous, startled sound. "Me? Sarah, I started this whole mess. I'm a suburban water terrorist. I committed a felony that we're all pretending was a miracle." Mr. Henderson, who was sitting nearby, smiled gently. "You're a hero, son," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the entire room's agreement. "You didn't just refill a pool. You gave us our neighborhood back." And that's how I, Leo Maxwell, the unemployed engineer and gnome enthusiast, reluctantly became the interim president of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. My first official act was to stand at the very podium Brenda had used for her tirades. "My first motion," I announced, my voice echoing slightly in the suddenly quiet room, "is to strike Articles 12 through 27 from the Covenant, the sections pertaining to lawn height, decorative statutes, approved shades of beige, and vehicle modifications. All in favor?" A joyous, deafening roar of "Aye!" filled the room. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The following Saturday, I met Sully for a celebratory lunch at a local diner. We slid into a worn vinyl booth, the air thick with the smell of bacon and freedom. We ordered burgers and 2 tall, frosty beers. After the waitress left, I slid a plain white envelope across the table. "Here," I said quietly. "It's my half." Sully looked at the envelope, then at me. "Half of what?" "The water bill," I explained. "I did the math. 50,000 gallons at the current municipal rate, plus a little extra for their investigative time and my own guilty conscience. I'm going to mail it to the city water department as an anonymous donation from a different state." Sully chuckled and pushed the envelope back across the table to me. "Don't be an idiot, Maxwell. You're thinking like a civilian. You're the president now. You have power." "What are you talking about?" "The old HOA, under Brenda," he said, taking a long sip of his beer, "had a massive contingency and maintenance fund. She mostly used it to pay lawyers to write threatening letters. I happened to be talking to your new treasurer, that nice Mrs. Gable with the door, and I suggested that the fund should cover the cost of the emergency pool refill and system flush that occurred last weekend. The motion passed unanimously this morning. It's already paid for." He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "By her." We stared at each other for a second, the beautiful, poetic justice of it all washing over us. Then we both burst out laughing. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, gut-busting, cathartic roar of laughter that turned heads across the diner. The bill for our act of rebellion had been paid in full by the tyrant herself. 3 months later. The scene at the Harmony Creek community pool was almost unrecognizable. It was vibrant, chaotic, and alive. A community BBQ was in full swing. The air smelled of charcoal and chlorine and happiness. Dozens of kids were splashing and shouting in the pool, their laughter echoing off the water. Mr. Henderson's bird bath was back in his yard, surrounded by an entire flock of unapproved sparrows. I was at the grill, flipping burgers, a task I'd been assigned by Sarah, who was organizing the whole event. She laughed at something I said, her smile as bright as the August sun. Near the clubhouse, a new community garden had been planted, and in the very center, standing proud and defiant, was a row of thriving tomato plants, heavy with ripe red fruit. Guarding them, his fishing pole glinting in the sun, was Norman. He'd been promoted to head of security. I looked out at the scene. The joy, the easy conversation, the genuine community that had been forged in the crucible of our ridiculous little war. I was no longer the isolated, cynical guy who had moved here for peace and quiet. I had accidentally stumbled into something so much better. I'd found a home. They say you can't fight City Hall, but they never tell you what happens when you fight a petty tyrant with a bigger hose. Turns out you don't just win, you get your neighborhood back, and some really, really good tomatoes.